difficult because you've got to deal with the elements, the people around you. It's not as comfortable because you haven't got a table. So you've got to get used to all those things. But you're actually there. You can feel the elements, you can feel the atmosphere, and this is something that you can't portray if you just copy a photo or a picture out of a magazine. This is a photograph of me painting the man with the tin, and the next painting is the man I'm painting. It was in a country town called Colac, and there was a little group of us up there painting, and somebody had asked this gentleman whether he would sit for us. I said to somebody, aren't we going to pay him or give him something? And she said, we already have. And what it was 2 lots of half a dozen cans of beer. And while he was sitting for us, he went through the whole dozen. Fortunately, I took a photo because although the man sat there for 3 or 4 hours for us, the dog didn't. This was another little photo I took in that area, painting I did in that area. And the last one was done this year when we went up to a winery called Warrenwood. And I rather liked the geese, and so I put them in front of the barrels. And now we're going to have a look at a few of my still life paintings. I paint a little bit abstract with some of the still life. I'm not keen on a photographic look. I like to make it more painterly. Now, the first one here was rather extraordinary. I was buying some eggs in the supermarket and they came in black cartons. And I thought, oh, that'd be interesting, the combination of the black carton and the white or brown eggs. So that was the story behind that one, and I've never seen any black cartons since. The next one is just a floral painting of Australian natives. The kettle and fruit speaks for itself. The next one is, in our garden we've got some ferns which grow up to the windowsill. And in that fern, a bird built a nest, which I watched with interest. And so I was able to watch the eggs being laid and the chickens being hatched and the birds fly away. And what I've done with that is I've got some paper bark off an old gum tree in the garden, and I've placed it round to make a collage, and then I've done a little bit of painting over the top of the paper bark. So that's in memory of that bird. The glasses are another still life I did with a pattern effect. The next one I have done, which is more abstract, and the eggs and the wine glass is more realistic. And the next one is actually our backyard with the sun filtering through the floor of the veranda. And this last little one is just some seagulls sitting on a fence that was also done with that Yapo ground that you could wipe it out. I love people. I love being in a crowd at a restaurant, in a cafe, and there are so many wonderful faces and wonderful costumes and groups of people. I've done a lot of sketching in my sketchbooks, you'll see, on the beach, in a cafe, maybe just the profile. And you don't have to paint or draw. this is more drawing the whole person. You can just do, because they move, so it doesn't matter. You just get in the profile or the hands or whatever it is that grabbed you at the time. And I think this is what I enjoy with drawing the most. I've done quite a lot of portraits. People's faces interest me, and it's got a lot of character and a lot of definition, so I enjoy doing that. This portrait was done, she was an English lady whose daughter used to do side saddle riding in England, and she dressed up in the costume that you would wear if you were riding a horse with a side saddle, and had a rather snooty air about it that I liked. And this is one of my life drawings that is done with multimedia. I think I did acrylic and crayon. I never paint from somebody else's photo or something out of a magazine. Most of my paintings, I have been there and spent at least a couple of hours. Some of them, like some of my big paintings of Carlton and the city, which is a combination of different scenes, I could have been there many, many times, half a dozen, 9 times, many times. But the paintings that I finish aren't always the first paintings I've done. I can do a painting 3 or 4 times before I'm satisfied enough to have it framed. Now we move on to a trip that I did quite some years ago in 1997. I did a workshop in Andalusia in the south of Spain. The lady was an English lady who went to live in Spain. The first little painting here, which is called Santa Rosa, was her house. The next 3 or 4 are street scenes. And the one at the end is interesting. It was called Castello. It was a medieval town. It had no water. The people had to pull the water up from a well. It had no electricity or gas. And in 1973, when Franco was in power, he built a small city down on the wide plain, and all the people moved down to this new village. And in between that time, it's just been sitting there. And when we visited it, it's behind a city wall. It's up on the top of a mountain. And hippies have taken over. They have cafes there, and they make small goods. And they can make a living there because there are a lot of tourists. It's a collage. It was in rocks, and therefore I tore the paper down the sides here to give this rocky feel about it. It's been painted in watercolours and gouache. I've put stuck tissue paper here and covered with gesso, and then put in the paint on top of that. These orange roofs are pieces of orange paper pasted on. It goes up a mountain, it comes right up the top here, so I've actually torn here. Another trip we did in the 90s, 1995, was to France, and these first 5 paintings are paintings I did in Paris. A couple of them are views that I could see from the hotel window. And the last one is a trip we did to Chartres, and you can see Chartres Cathedral in the distance. And the interesting part about that was that was in 1995. And then when my son Philip went to live in Switzerland, we visited once, and we took him and his wife and his two daughters, who were about 10 and 12, to Schatz, and we stood in the exact place where I had painted that painting many years ago. I use photos and sketches, and once the painting gets to a certain stage, I throw the photos and sketches away, and that painting is the painting that I develop. It doesn't have to look exactly like what I've photographed. And now we move to 1999, where we had a lovely trip on a boat in the Inside Passage of Alaska. And the first painting is the Inside Passage on the boat. The next one is a glacier. And this was a little town by the name of Stagway that we got off the boat and visited. The next one was a brothel town, so they told us. That you've got to remember that all these small towns, you couldn't get out of them in the winter time. They were completely hemmed in with snow. And the name of that little town was Ketchikan. And then we did a nice train trip in the Rockies in Canada, and that's where the next two paintings are. Italy in 1999, we were on our English Ramblers tour, and I took a couple of, where we did a lot of walking, about 16 to 17 kilometres a day, and I took a couple of days off to paint. These paintings were taken in, painted in Tuscany. The first one is a sculpture to Giotto, a very famous painter. France in 2013, I did another workshop in a little place called Le Dev. It was an English couple again. We stayed in their place. I think there were about 6 students. They had a little minibus. They took us around to villages, and the husband taught the artwork and his wife did the cooking. And these were small places. One was called Hulot, and another one Saint-Gerlian-le-Desert, and Lake de Salag. They were all very small villages. So lastly, just a few odd paintings of different places. The first two were painted in Peru. The lady is sitting on a footpath, and she happened to be right outside our motel window. So it was very easy to paint her, and she was selling different cloths and clothes which were set out on the pavement. The next lady is got a little hand puppet that she's doing some sort of little act there. The next one is a lovely little painting of in a place called Zug in Switzerland, where Philip, my eldest son, was living. And this restaurant was on the side of a lake, and it was a fish restaurant, and they used to catch the fish and bring it straight into the kitchen and cook it, and these people were having lunch. This next painting is in Vienna. It's the apartment. About 4 of those windows would have been the apartment of Herbert's apartment when he lived in Vienna. This was taken in Bali, where we had a holiday, and we were living in Ubud, and there was an area that was being rebuilt, and that was one of the young fellows who were building a house, and I was sitting there for about 3 hours painting them, and I thought I'd like to give them a little something, and so I went to the cafe, but the only thing I could buy them was cigarettes. That was the only thing that was sold. And this is quite a charming little scene. It's called a double hump bridge. It's in Borrowdale in the Lakes District in England. And it hasn't got snow on it. It is actually a white bridge. And this last one is a cathedral in Berlin. It was built in the 19th century. It's was built to commemorate the first German Kaiser, and it is the tallest spire in Berlin, but it was damaged during the war, and they rebuilt it, and they kept the part of the spire that had been damaged as a commemoration. In 2011, we flew to Israel, and this is my painting of Jerusalem with the three faiths side by side: the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians, and some travellers walking in between the three great religions. It is my hope that one day, not too far off, these groups of people can come together and live in harmony. I'd like to say that if you'd ever had a thought about doing something creative and said, but I can't do it, have you ever tried? Because unless you've tried, you don't know, and it's a possibility. Particularly as we're all living longer, and maybe we haven't done these things when we're younger, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do because when you're older, you've got the time. And I just advise anybody that's ever thought about, I'd love to do that, to just darn well try it.